Hello, Spirit folk, and welcome to this week's episode of Van Spirit, an exploration of the intersection between van life and the spiritual practices, intentions, and beliefs that keep us grounded on the road and in life. For me, art has always stood right at the cross-section of life and meaning-making. I'm starting this episode from my editing suite at my son and daughter-in-law's house in Madison, Wisconsin. I wanted to take a moment and tell you about this unique episode where we talked to Ken Stout, an Ozark painter who taught and chaired the University of Arkansas's art department for many years. He and his wife Donna, also a renowned painter whose body of work has been shown pretty much coast to coast in art galleries, New York, Dallas, the West Coast, but they've made their home in Northwest Arkansas, which has been their inspiration for many years. Ken and Donna also happen to be Cindy's aunt and uncle, in full disclosure, and we wanted to sit down with Ken to talk about the intersection of his art with his life, especially those of family, community, connection, which are all spiritual aspects of our lives. One subject who has made his way into Ken's art is his brother, whose life story has encouraged Ken to dive into the twists and the turns that shape who we are and being part of something larger than ourselves as we create and explore the stories of our own lives. For the artist, those private twists and turns, for us they would be private twists and turns, they're often captured in the paintings, sculptures, or performances that are both tangible and very public for the artist. We'll talk to Ken about what that's like. This episode's format is a little different too. It's a bit of a documentary dive for me. We hope you enjoy Cindy's walk through Ken's studio and then my interview with him following.
Hi, I'm Cindy, and I'm here at Van Spirit, where van life and spirituality meet. And I am here in Winslow, Arkansas with my Uncle Ken, who I've been coming to see for the last 30 years of my life or so, from childhood to adulthood. And we're here at his studio, and we're going to take a walk through it.
Welcome to the studio, and let's do it.
So I noticed you paint a lot of my father.
Yes, these did a series of paintings over 2 or 3 years. They were these large, life-size, I call them paintings, 6 feet by 4, I guess. And I guess I wanted them to be kind of warnings to this person, to your father, that of the danger of inaction, of not acting. And so they're almost always about passivity, but the danger of passivity and the danger of habits. And I was attracted also by the way that, well, like in this case, he's sitting and something is happening, like the car headlights are lighting him, and the cat is pulling the soup bowl down. And it's nothing like a real tragic kind of experience of having soup spilled, but it's just that moment. And I think I started this from him and I finished it without him as a model. And then, but this one was actually totally done from him at the doorway. And it was, he's asleep at the door. And, you know, the door is an opening and he's not using it. And so that was, you know, there were things that were just very habitual, as you know, like the jar of water, the bag with lots of things in it, lots of things that were just habitual. And I was fascinated and repelled by the almost icon nature of things, like we were talking earlier about a coffee can with sand in it and like a year's worth of cigarette butts. And it became like a little totem. And I found that really interesting. And yet, because he's my brother, it was just very disturbing. And so they were almost trying to get him to see himself. They were painted for him, but for me too. It was an importance of, it wasn't just a model, somebody I love and somebody who's, who's part of the family, very much part of the family, and has become sort of a lightning rod and a sort of self-defeating sort of. So a lot of the paintings had to do with this, almost not a healing, but trying to show him something that would be maybe embarrassing to him, and maybe like a warning. I don't know. And we talked about it. We went to the museum show and saw more of these, and I stood there with him, and he said very little about the show.
Right.
So,
right.
Anyway, they seemed important to me, and I did this series of about 12, including one that's double size called The Waiting Room, which is in there. It's so big. And then I went a few years later, did some smaller paintings that we can look at later if we want, that are much more conservative, not as big and explosive, but more calm, and almost in a tradition of a triptych, like a church painting, like only there'd be a little scene in the middle, and then on either side there'd be little moments, little vignettes of hands and how cigarettes are held and how things are done. Just how habits become almost religious or like rituals.
Oh, yes.
For all of us.
Right.
It wasn't just for him, really.
Right.
I could see it in myself. Not necessarily those things, but how you worship delay. And, there's one I can't find for some reason where he's sitting, has his foot in that door, keep it from shutting, and has his foot on the door.
Oh, that's telling.
And I can't find that. I don't know if I left it at an exhibition or what. Anyway.
That's really telling. Opportunity, but yet not sure if you want that opportunity, like that fear, like the fear of moving forward in something that is unknown. And
That says it. And like you and I were talking about a few minutes ago, you don't have to reach for symbolism. It's everywhere, the way you're holding your hand. It's how we just assign that to something, like paper towels are tilted over there, and your head is tilted like those. Not that that means anything profound, but it can. I'd rather discover that, like when he put his foot in the door and on the door.
Just another tidbit about this position. I can just imagine he's without a shirt on, or maybe it's a very slim-fitting shirt, but he would always unbuckle his belt just for more ease.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but I remember that actually.
I remember that white leather belt. And he had for many years.
And here's all hell is breaking loose here. Table is falling. There's a water. There's an old car here. If the floor is just broken through, and it's getting closer to it, and it's right here, the jagged floor, and it's called The Waiting Room. He's waiting so long that he's oblivious to the fact that, of course, the skeleton here, it's almost too obvious and stuff.
To me, it looks like he's sitting without a shirt on a toilet.
Oh, that could be.
And growing up.
Oh.
And there would always be a cat in there.
No kidding.
Yeah.
In a way, it doesn't necessarily read just as water. It's kind of something
being sucked into the vortex.
Oh, this way?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting because I'm thinking of it going that way. But either way.
Right. There's just so much there.
Yeah.
Hanging out in an artist's studio is always kind of a fascinating look into the environment in which they create the art. The views that they have outside their windows as they're making their coffee, the whimsical stuff they might put in their bathroom, the way they organize their tools in space, the sketches that probably nobody will ever see. The years of art filed neatly, piled against walls, the pieces from other projects that never quite made it. It's all a look into the mind of an artist. So Ken, now you and I get to talk, and
Finally.
yeah, I too have been coming up to Winslow to visit you and Donna for, well, 35 years, because
Wow.
it was one of the first stops on Cindy's introducing me to her family. So,
Oh,
so
I hope
and we
I-
met you, I think, at the wedding too. So 35 years we've been coming up here and visiting you and the studio and seeing your artwork.
And Donna, another painter.
Yes, Donna, and so it's been a real journey watching your craft over the years. And this channel, Van Spirit, is about the intersection between spirituality, however we define it. Some people define it as religious devotion, other people as a connection with nature, transcendental, enlightened, whatever, it's about that kind of general how we connect with something larger than ourselves when we're out and about in the world. And so with that kind of framework, I'd love to hear a little bit about where you see that intersection between your artwork and life. Big life with the L, the big L.
The big life. Yeah, big L. Yeah. I suppose I think about the fact that I was trained so classically in visual arts, model, figure. I mean, the whole thing about that, about color analysis, about everything. Now things are much more word driven in art schools. There is not the necessity, they think, as much for drawing and so on. It's more conceptual.
So drawing a concept rather than an image.
Yeah, or assigning words and concepts to a found image or a made image, but that the image itself, we talk about the word painterly, that's not so much an issue. It's more idea driven, which is fine. But I was part of the old school, and so I knew anatomy, so much so that I went back and taught anatomy at the same art school. And so it's part of my tool chest. And so for years I worked from the model, which is a consequence of being in a school where you're working from the model. And then I began applying it more to figures that I knew, and not necessarily knew in the classical sense, but just trying to discover their presence through painting them.
So your brother and your mother and your family became models for the art rather than some abstract concept.
Exactly, paying a model to come. So it was more that, and sometimes totally observed, and sometimes just through memory, doing paintings. And as I was telling Cindy earlier, the symbolism didn't have to be assigned to something like this. A glass means this. But it was just that by observing anything, the way a person puts his hand over a chair arm or the touch on that becomes symbolic in a context. It determines everything. You don't have to struggle for it. So I would see her dad would take a pose with his foot in the door and his foot on the door. And I thought, holy crap, that is really interesting, because that really says so much about hesitation and worshiping that middle passive stage. And so they became a series about passivity and the danger of that. And it was really trying to be a warning. They were not necessarily trying to heal, but they were trying to just say, watch out.
Then that makes it really real. So it's not an abstract concept.
Exactly.
And it's not a classical model, but from the actual person in front of you, this universal emerges that becomes the subject, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it seemed important to do. It wasn't so much an observational thing or assigning a story. There was a story already there.
Yeah.
A narrative.
And that's talk about mining the spiritual depths of one's own experience.
Yeah, mining is a good way to put it.
Like rather than going and finding it in books, but it's writing your own, the fabric of our own families. The one thing that struck me the other night, we were at the Walton Arts Center here in Bentonville,
in
Fayetteville, and you had done 20 years ago
Yeah.
the central piece within the arts complex. So we're going and watching Rachmaninoff.
Yeah.
And I asked, you started telling me or Cindy and I, about all the characters in the painting. And I was imagining you in your studio pulling out of your head of this character or that character. But you had modeled every single one of those people.
Live in front of the painting.
Live in front of the painting. So the
Painted
painting
right
was coming to life with the models as it's... And
Yeah.
to me, that was amazing. Again, there's a reality to that. Like, and you had stories for each of the people. And what a connective tissue, because there's the town and all these connections, and they weren't just the image of a man with his arm up or the woman with her children. They were actual kids.
Specific people.
Yeah.
Sometimes several people to get the same pose, and losing relationships because you would paint over one person, and you'd find another model who'd come in and say, not a model, but a friend or associate, or somebody I just observed on the street. One guy did ductwork, and he was just fascinating. I mean, he did all the refrigeration for every restaurant in a college town. A lot of restaurants and a lot of coolers. And he came into the studio, and he had an old cell phone, a flip phone. They're still in the mural. But there was people I knew, people who were benefactors to the place, very wealthy people. And it was just an interesting crowd of Hieronymus Bosch kind of things at times happening.
Yes. And interpersonal behind things that the poet Miller Williams was in there.
Right.
Father of Lucinda Williams, which I thought was kind of cool. I loved her music for years. And then, but he's in there with an English department wannabe, if I can say it that way.
Oh, good
and they're looking at each other, and there's this. So it pulls in the whole community, and
And actually, I started off the mural, which is 50 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I started off by just blocking it out and trying to do it just without anybody around. And I got it to a certain satisfying point, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't specific enough. It was all done in browns and grays, and it didn't acknowledge the fact that I wanted this to be about intermission, where the stage shuts down and the play becomes the whole audience. So that's what was interesting.
Yeah. And something occurs to me. For me, spirituality, spiritual centeredness is all about connection, connecting and being present to what is around us. And Cindy and I have moved around our whole marriage. We've probably lived in 20 different apartments, houses, lofts, whatever, vans. And we've never really, our connective tissue to community is spread out over the country and now the world. You have this unique experience here in Winslow and Fayetteville of how long have you lived in this?
Oh, wow.
This town?
In Winslow?
Yeah.
We're right south of Fayetteville, but probably about 30 or 35 years here in this little city.
And so when you're painting that mural, you're painting all these connections and relationships.
Yeah.
And I'm often envious of people who have been in a place and have let those roots grow. It's something I probably will never experience in my life, the way we've lived it. But it's an interesting thing that
it is.
The geography of a connection. Too.
Yeah, good way to put it. Your geography is just vaster. So it's not lacking at all. I mean, it's what you've chosen to do, a very rich life.
I would agree. It's just difference in choice.
I mean, you go from a very landed ministry in Evanston, a wonderful, beautiful church. I think about this quite frequently with you. And then you go and you just say, I want to do something more immediate. I want to help people more directly who are not maybe societally challenged with their problems, but actually physically and mentally challenged. So you went to Okinawa, just picked up and left. You
Yes,
too.
we did.
Yeah,
And
that's fantastic.
Cindy took a little convincing. We were living
Well,
in Evanston at the time. And
yeah,
it's all stable. We have a church and community, and been there for
yeah.
about 5 years.
5 years.
And then we're like, let's
do something.
Let's go back into the military, and I'll be a chaplain. And yeah, it took a little. She's a little slower on the.
Are you glad you did it?
I am. It
I
was
bet.
a remarkable experience to be with people so young. It was most of the folks that I sat with like this close and talked through their lives with 18 to 25 years old. Kind of right at that crux of and charged with amazing responsibilities. They in their life day to day held other people's lives in their hands as airplane mechanics or as everything, and then they would have to hold this as such young people, and marriages and families and being moved around the world
and
randomly.
separated from families in many cases, I guess.
Yeah. Especially in Okinawa during COVID.
Yeah.
It was a very different ministry, and now we're back home, and
your ministry is on the road, so to speak.
we'll see. Yeah,
Maybe.
Yeah. That's one reason we started this channel, was to just continue that outreach to whatever community we kind of wind up in, whether it's a traditional church community or a sangha or a military chaplaincy or van life. And we have no idea where this is going.
Yeah.
So thanks for being, you're one of our early stops on
thank you.
our van life journey.
Thanks, Bret.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your studio and life. And
you're welcome.
I think we've got pastrami sandwiches waiting for us down the road. So
boy.
we're off.
I'm ready for that.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Van Spirit. And as always, be well, be blessed, and keep moving.
Mm-hmm.